Welcome back, Scott. Appreciate you
Morning.
donating your time. Got some good feedback on your videos. I need to remember
Oh,
to
good.
send you links when somebody comments, so you don't miss them out. I'm usually like 2 day delay with that.
I'm
But
terrible at keeping up with that too. I'm terrible at it.
yeah,
Really,
yeah, but it's
as
cool.
you,
Even if it's just like a couple comments, it's always good to see that people are acknowledging it, and definitely there are some good feedback. And I wanted
great.
you to open up about something that we keep mentioning, body fat. So understanding body fat, because more often than not, we just perceive it as this big, evil things that we need to get rid of. Do you want to kind of dwell into details? What does body fat do? Types of body fat, and so on and so forth? Because we know from our discussions that being too lean isn't a good thing. So I would like to hear from you and dissect it. What's happening there? Why isn't it a good thing? And maybe is there some kind of number people need to chase, and so on and so forth. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, it was once believed that body fat was sort of just this depot for energy storage, and that is largely one of its roles. But it's seemingly becoming more and more um, known that it's a lot more complex than that. Body fat has got a lot of important roles, and it functions in a lot of different ways throughout the body, and it influences a lot of things. It is largely an energy storage depot for sure, especially white adipose tissue. So there's essentially three types of body fat in the human body. So we have white, brown, and beige. Um, they're slightly different from another. White is sort of the one that when you talk about body fat, that's what everyone's referring to. It's the white adipose tissue. It's going to be the majority of the body fat on your body, and it's got a lot of important roles. It is definitely an energy storage depot. It does hormone regulation. So having too low of body fat, you can imagine from an energy storage point of view, you have lack of. So that's not really a concern in the modern world. Nobody's really seemingly starving for food, as we can see. But having too low body fat can disrupt hormone regulation, and that can become problematic. It regulates appetite, so it's a place where leptin is synthesized. Leptin controls our hunger. Leptin and ghrelin is our hunger loop. So if we're messing with that, we can be, influencing appetite. It's also insulation for extreme weather, and cushion protection. There is body fat that surrounds some of our vital organs. That's known as visceral fat. That's a type of white adipose tissue. Um, it's protecting the organs. It's almost like a cushion. And then it's also something that the brown does is it's more in infants. It's not really metabolically active like in terms of the ability to synthesize leptin and stuff like that. But what it does, um, it's a small amount and it's mostly in infants. But in humans, like that aren't babies, we have very little brown fat. We have some in our shoulders, our neck, and in our spines. And then we have beige fat. Now, beige fat can actually be beneficial. We can utilize that because cold exposure and stuff like that actually converts white fat to beige fat to provide warmth. But when we're talking about body composition and aesthetics and stuff like that, we're always talking about white adipose tissue and trying to reduce that. I would say most of it is going to be subcutaneous and visceral. Visceral is the fat surrounding our organs. If that gets too high, there's also problems, cardiovascular problems, inflammation problems, and stuff like that. but you can't have too little as well. So there's always this sort of fine balance between what's a healthy amount of body fat and what's a desirable amount of body fat from an aesthetic point of view seemingly is being skewed with social media these days.
You unwrapped there so many things, and I'm like,
Yeah,
okay,
it's a
where
lot.
where do we start? First of all, you mentioned something already that I wanted to ask is, can we turn these different fats to one to another? So when we are babies, we have different body fat and so on and so forth. Uh, you mentioned cold exposure. What else can we do to, well, first of all, the wide body fat, so to speak, does it have any other function apart from just being energy storage? And why do we store it so excessively at moment?
The white adipose tissue is the most predominant amount of the most predominant type of fat on our bodies. It is our energy storage, but it also regulates certain hormone productions. So leptin, like I mentioned, the leptin-ghrelin loop, leptin is basically synthesized with the white fat cells. So it's important. Having too little or too much will change the environment, physiological environment, and that can have different impacts. So if we get it too high, the body is going to start to it's going to create the ability to store more fat. Once the fat cell has been created, it's there. You can't really get rid of it aside from like invasive procedures like liposuction or something like that. Um, but what you can do is either fill the cell up with triglycerides or empty the cell. But the cell itself, imagine it's like a balloon. It sort of stays. We just fill it up or deflate it based on energy availability or energy balance. So the body can continue to produce these white or these fat cells. But what can happen is too much body fat, it starts to accumulate in areas like subcutaneous and visceral, and that has different impacts. The visceral fat is, like I mentioned earlier, surrounding the vital organs. If there's too much there, it's caused a lot of issues with health markers. And then obviously it's the easiest to lose. It almost seems, and I don't know, but I would say Lyle McDonald would know this, but it almost seems like the body produces or basically stores body fat in priority sequence. So the last place it wants to put it is surrounding our organs. But once you have put it everywhere else, it kind of has no choice. And that's because too much visceral fat can become a problem. It's also the quickest to be lost, especially with things like cardiovascular activity or aerobic activity. The visceral fat will start to be reduced relatively quickly. And that's sort of what we want to get down, or we want to keep under certain percentages, because that's where health markers start to decline. And on the flip side, if you get body fat too low, it's going to be largely being lost from those areas. You're not really going to change the amount of brown fat, to my knowledge anyway, on the body. Beige also, it can convert, some white fat can be converted to beige, but it's small amounts. It's not game changing amounts. It's the white that's the predominant one that we have to manipulate.
Do we know what makes us store body fat in different areas of our body? Because for men, it's usually legs that's gonna get really lean very fast. For women,
Yeah.
the last to kind of lean out. Do we know what's happening there? Why is there such difference? Because every time I work with a female, they get shredded up extremely fast, and
Yeah.
everything else is to last to go. For men, they're gonna get lean everything else apart from their stomach. It's like
Yeah.
that's an uphill battle for that. So what's is there anything specific that people can look for to try to regulate where body fat is kind of stored?
It's largely coming down to hormones. There's, to my knowledge, there's no real explanation as to why, because we have men and women have the same hormones, but we have them in varying amounts. But the female fat distribution pattern is largely waist and below, and men is largely waist and above. And then if you see menopausal women, you see that switch. all of a sudden their body fat storage starts to become waist and above. And it's usually because, not usually, it is because the decline in hormones, because once they're in menopause or perimenopausal and the fat distribution is changing, because things like estradiol and progesterone are on the decline, where largely men's estrogen and progesterone levels aren't really fluctuating all that much. So it comes down to a hormonal thing. But like I said, to my knowledge, we don't know really why that happens. There's arguments that men, have fat storage waist and above to protect vital organs, but females have similar, if not the exact same, vital organs in terms of orientation on the body. It's same. Yet they don't store it that way. So a lot of it comes down to thoughts of potential pregnancy and the ability to provide energy for a baby or a potential baby. But to my knowledge, again, this is not really proven. This is just speculation, thoughts, ideas. Lyle to me is the Yoda when it comes to this kind of stuff, and I don't think he is confident on the final answer either. It's sort of the same thing, speculation. But he's who I would ask to get a clear definition of why. But it is a hormonal thing, and that's why we see the switches. And I have seen some men that have a female fat distribution pattern. And when I look at their hormones, endogenous hormones, you can see the difference. They don't have the typical hormone distribution in terms of the amounts that I would see in most men. They usually have large or higher estradiol, slightly lower testosterone levels, and that seemingly fits with what we're seeing. Same thing, I've seen some PCOS women. I've trained many of them, and they have more fat distribution like a male, waist and above, and they usually have higher androgen levels. That's part of the ailment. So the distribution comes down to hormones mostly, but it doesn't really change how we lose body fat. At the end of the day, we have to create an energy deficit, and body fat will come down. Now, the difference is that depending on hormonal regulation and obviously gender, where your body is going to first prioritize the mobilization of fatty acids and then therefore the oxidation depends. Like you mentioned, men, the last thing they see is six-pack abs. And even that, once they have six-pack abs, they still usually have some fat on the love handle area, that spare tire look. That is the last little bit of stubborn fat on a male. With females, we see abs coming in right away, and yet there's still body fat on their legs. And that's because the way the body's prioritizing fat storage and fat mobilization. And then there's also sometimes you'll see females can actually mobilize body fat. And if it's not oxidized, it can actually be stored somewhere differently, depending on their hormonal environment, which is why sometimes you'll see some females looking leaner from the waist above, but their body fat composition or their body fat percentage hasn't really changed. And it's just because of the shift of where it's being stored. And that's usually influenced hormonally or environmentally.
Interesting, because that's kind of tying into what you were discussing in the last video, like measuring tools, why understanding like which method is most appropriate for you is the best. And it will definitely affect the body impedance, I guess, because if your body fat is more upper or lower, depending on which one you use, it can show completely different results. Going on all that, for our aesthetics, is there a reason to have a certain amount of body fat on our body at all times? Is there a potential that we diminish our ability to burn body fat if we, so to speak, become too lean? Or what I'm trying to say is, I'm guessing, are we losing our ability to excrete energy if we are getting too lean? Do we get too lethargic? Do we get too, and so on and so forth? Is there a negative kind of downstream effect in our ability to build lean muscle tissue, which essentially makes us look the best if we are too lean.
If we're speaking to unenhanced athletes, and when I say unenhanced for this context, I mean like exogenously hormones provided. So not including certain performance enhancing drugs, but like literally exogenous hormones. If we're not providing that, if you get too lean, the body is going to start to, it's constantly trying to adapt to the environment. So if it senses an energy deficit, it's going to make amends. It's going to do things to prevent you from continually to basically starve. It's not necessarily all that noticeable in the beginning because the body can spare energy in a million ways. It's not just your wake up at 7 o'clock, count your steps on your watch and go. It can do things without you even realizing it. Your heart rate, the ability to exchange gases with breathing, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so your NEAT, that's the large proponent of your energy balance anyways. So fidgeting, finger tapping, toe tapping, things that you would do without even being aware, the body will just slow that down or prevent it from happening to spare energy. So as energy availability becomes limited, the body just starts adapting. Now, you can, of course, drug your way through all these things, which is what many people are doing, but you're going to pay something to someone somewhere down the line, whether it's right away or down the road. Something has to give because you can't cheat this biological aspect of what we're trying to achieve or what we're trying not to have happen. The body will not really let you starve itself, provided you're not locked away somewhere. It's going to get you to do something somehow to preserve energy or get you to increase energy intake. So by being too low, things that are adapting are things you're probably not being aware of. But most people are noticing fatigue, feelings of lethargy and stuff like that. And that's just because the body doesn't have enough raw materials to continue to provide you with what you're asking of it. So it's looking to cut corners wherever it can. And that largely comes down to the type of training you're doing as well. If you are prioritizing lean muscle accrual or at least retention, the body will try hard to not steal from your muscle reserves. But the signaling that's required to do that is quite specific. And I largely see females not trained that way. So without them even being aware, they think, well, I go to the gym, I train every day, I do these things. But if they're not actually giving a strong stimulus to maintain that lean contractile tissue, the body will let it go because it's energy costly. It's very energy expensive to keep muscle. And if there's not a lot of raw materials coming in, the body's sensing a need, it'll let some of it go. And it's not stuff you'll see right away. It's stuff that's accumulating, which is why the body composition checks, in my opinion, via calipers are so relevant, because you can catch that stuff hopefully before it's too late. And you can also make sure that, like we talked about a few minutes ago, if body fat is mobilized and then restored somewhere else in the body, say on a female, it gets stored down their lower legs, we can go and choose to measure lower limbs, because on a lot of the equations, they'll check calf, maybe the front of the thigh, maybe, but that's really the only location. But there's like 50,000 places you could check on your legs if you wanted to. Just pick one. And you can start to really pay attention to, is fat loss occurring or accumulating in these areas? And that really helps put a light on what's going on physiologically.
Yeah, the reason I brought up and what you just highlighted as well is that from personal experience, if I spend too much time in really hard calorie deficit, because I've been on very hard calorie deficit, I've even been to the point where I stop blinking just to preserve energy. And it gets to the point where you just seemingly don't get any leaner, your caliper measurements don't change, and you're still pushing the calorie deficit even harder, and you end up just getting smaller and weaker and risking some kind of injury. And you reintroduce some food, and lo and behold, your body starts to kind of opening up and looking harder, leaner, and all those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's along the lines. What I'm asking is like, is there a cutoff point where there is point of no return? No matter what you do, that last body fat is not going to go. You're just going to get weaker and start losing lean muscle mass. And based on all that, how do you figure out when you're pushing too hard?
So that's a good question. So, you know, assuming that you're not locked away and unable to get food, the your body is going to largely win the war of keeping you from starving itself to literal death. So the body has lots and lots and lots of ways to stop this from happening. You'd have to literally not be able to eat for God knows months and months and months before you'll actually die from lack of body fat, essentially. But what can happen is, like we mentioned, if body fat gets too low, then the leptin ghrelin loop, so the hormones that influence our appetite, they can be skewed. And you will then just go out and eat. There's been lots and lots of clients over the years I've worked with when they're getting lean, like stage level lean, their sleep is so compromised because their body is literally trying to keep them up to go, you know, forage for food. Like it's doing things to make you search out energy. And you'll notice, or if you get lean enough, people will notice a heightened sense of smell. Like they notice foods. You could smell a loaf of bread being baked fucking 10 miles down the road, when you're starving. It's because the body is sensitizing certain things to make you go get what it needs. In females, essential fats, like essential adipose tissue, is somewhere around that 9-10-ish%, give or take. 9-10%, maybe 11, usually around 9 or 10% is essential. So in other words, if you start dipping below that, essential means for life, to live. So if you don't have that amount, you're going to die. Now, what skews that is obviously drug use. You can get females, and I've coached females that are relatively quite low in the single digit body fat percentage, but that's because they're essentially more male at this point. We're exogenously provided hormones, so it's not really a fair comparison. But if you take a female that's not enhanced via exogenous hormones, essential fatty acids, or essential fat is around 9 or 10%. Where a male, it's more like 2, 3, maybe 4, something like that. So your body's not really going to go lower than that unless you're pharmaceutically influencing it. So
You're
the
not going to
tip
go
off or the
minus
cutoff.
4% body fat like Ronnie Coleman.
What's that?
You're not going to go minus 4% body fat like Ronnie Coleman did.
No, you're not going to go minus any percent of body fat. That's correct. Now, what you see on social media, obviously, is female physiques that are on stage. They're flirting with that single digit. They're flirting very close with it in the bikini category. The more muscular categories are below that. But again, they're essentially more male in terms of hormones at that point anyways, so it's not really the same. But if you are looking at a lean female, say an Olympic, I don't know, swimmer, or maybe a diver, maybe a gymnast. The gymnast maybe is a little bit slightly different, but they're flirting with that 10, 11, 12% body fat range. And that's flirting with essential, and it might even fall into the category of athletic. Athletic female body fat percentage is somewhere in the low to mid teens, give or take. And then from there, it kind of titrates up. In medicine or in clinical surroundings, average normal healthy body fat percentage for females is usually around 24-25% body fat, maybe even up to higher 20s. That's considered healthy, that's considered normal, that's considered average. That's probably considered obese in the fitness circle. because of the influence we're seeing from the social media influencers. But from a physiological health point of view, mid-20s is very quote unquote healthy. And that's sort of where, to me, the cutoff should be in terms of how much body fat do you want to acquire. And then the cutoff point for how lean do you want to be, that unfortunately is goal specific. The females that are aesthetically driven and have to step on stage in a competition of sort like bikini or something, they're flirting with single digits, or even less than that. Well, not less than
Even
single digits.
even bikini girls.
So the bikini girls. So I had a female. My last bikini competitor that competed won the overall, and via a DEXA and via calipers, she was just under 10%.
So
So
would you say, based on that experience, sorry I interrupted you, but I just want to get to this quickly. And if somebody is looking on Instagram model who's just done fitness bikini show and go, I want to look like that, and you go, you know what, that's not healthy, or you go like, yeah, great deal, we can get you there, or we can get you there for a week. What's the answer? What's the truth?
kind of all the above. It's not healthy. You can't sustain that without drugs. Um,
Right.
so if that is your priority, then in order to sustain that, you'll need to take drugs. Drugs are not healthy, so it kind of defeats that whole point. Um, can you get there? Of course, we do it. Will it take a week? Probably not. Can we keep you that lean for a week? Yeah, we can keep you that lean for a long, long time. But again, it's going to come at a cost. The cost will depend on how we're achieving this, and how we achieve that is going to depend on the person and their lifestyle. Um, but it's not realistic, and it's not sustainable without pharmaceutical help. So if you're looking to keep a physique and not have to rely on drugs to do so, you're not looking like a bikini girl that just stepped off stage. Not one that's winning, anyways. You can look like fantastic and be 19, 20, 22%. Like, it all depends on how you carry it and how you carry yourself. What you like is, an individual, but from a athletic looking, healthy body fat percentage, you can absolutely achieve it and sustain it without the use of drugs, but it won't look to the level of leanness that you see bikini girls winning competitions at. That's not natural.
What is a good fat loss rate if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to get to this bikini girl's kind of body, and you assess and you understand she doesn't want to compete, and you kind of go through all the ins and outs and tell, hey, you brought me Miss Olympia. You're probably not going to look like that without drugs, and it's not healthy. It's only maybe achievable for a week in a whole year. Let's set up some realistic target, maybe get you to low 20s, which you're going to look amazing. You're at, let's say, 28% body fat. What is a good fat loss rate, and how long would it take to get from 28 to 20?
At 28%, let's just assume these numbers are accurate. At 28%, I would be looking, and I had all the timeline in the world, and they weren't in a rush. I'd be looking to lose 1% every, I don't know, 10 days, every 2 weeks, maybe. I mean, yes, I could make it go faster, but it depends on the context of how do we want to achieve this. If I want them to establish, and I do, if I want them to establish habits and lifestyle changes that they're going to keep permanently, slower is going to be better. But if we don't care about that, they just literally said, I'm not taking drugs. How fast can I lose body fat? And I'm 20%. We could probably lose 1% a week, but that wouldn't be linear. And it wouldn't be necessarily easy, but it's totally doable. But I would say if you're trying to lose 8%, I would bank on it taking, and you're not using drugs, I would bank on it taking you closer to 20 weeks. That to me is a relatively realistic time frame. It shouldn't require anything extreme, anything overly aggressive. It should be relatively easy and sustainable. Um, and then once you get to that 20% or high teens, things start changing. The leaner you get, the harder your body's fighting back. Because again, the body does not want to get flirting with those essential fat levels. So it's going to do everything it can to prevent that. And it has a lot of influence on you, whether you believe it or not. It influences everything.
Do you find that if you are approaching the fat loss at slower rates, it might be beneficial in a sense of a long-term effect of maintaining that low body fat? Or is it easier to just go hard, gives them results, then they see those results, they are maybe really happy about how quick it happened, and they are sticking with it more consistently? Which one do you see more often? I'm not looking for a right answer. I'm looking for, from your experience, what have you experienced is seemingly the mentally easiest to deal with?
I actually see, I would say close to 50-50. And it's a personality thing. And I try to kind of discover that relatively early. If I need, if I have a client that needs to see results to keep compliance, that's a problem right off the bat to a degree, but we work with that and we deliver results right away. But as we're delivering results, we're trying to make them open and aware to the things that are more important. And as that's happening, as they're staying motivated because of progress, they're also learning what's more relevant down the line. But some people are perfectly fine with a longer, lower, slower approach, which is, in my opinion, overall a superior method. But it's going to come down to the context of the person, the goal, and the timeline. Um, the body, it's better to coax the body along than to try to force it. The more you force the body, the more the body is going to fight back. And that's just a biological adaptation that has to occur because the body is resilient to things and it doesn't really want to be disrupted from its homeostatic point. So every time you lean on it, it causes a cascade of reactions and adaptations, and those things are designed to prevent you from essentially harming yourself, which the body is thinking is a possibility. It doesn't really think or understand that you're just looking to move 8%. It just senses, I don't have enough energy. I have to do things because I can't let this go to here. And so all it's doing is adapting to the environment. So it's a constant adaptation that you just have to be sort of always aware of and making small adjustments or tweaks as needed to keep progress moving relatively smoothly. It can't move linearly, unfortunately, but with the least amount of aggressive, extreme nature as possible if sustainability is important. But again, like I said, if we need to get results right away for compliance, compliance trumps us all. If we don't have a compliant client, we don't have results, no matter how perfect the design is.
It kind of comes without saying, but I still want to go into that loop of how important is actually resistance training for maintaining body fat loss and things like that. Uh, Only because we still see a lot of extreme approaches, especially now when you have Ozempic, semaglutide, and all these other things. I know Lyle has written a full book on that. I haven't bought it yet, but I would like to read all about that because I don't have fancy knowledge on it. But is fat loss on its own without resistance training detrimental to a aesthetical outcome?
That'll depend on the amount of fat loss and the way you're achieving this. You can lose body fat without training. You can lose body fat without exercise at all. I mean, it happens all the time. But
So
you
we're
have to be
chasing
careful.
bikini look. We are chasing round glutes, hard legs, so to speak, not like muscularly defined,
Right.
but you know what I mean. So we are trying to get that look. Can we do that without training?
No, I understand what you're saying. You cannot build the muscle without training. if you have the leg development and glute development already, and that's all you want, you can maintain that to a large degree depending on how you approach the fat loss. So that's the theoretical answer, and that's the correct answer. But realistically, you need strength training. You need to cause a stimulus for the body to recognize the priority of your muscle, because the body is just looking from a priority sequence from top down. What do I need the most? And if it senses a lack of energy or a lack of raw materials that it needs, it's going to look at where can I spare energy. And if it does not recognize the need for muscle because you're not using it, it's on the chopping block. Maybe it's number one, maybe it's number 1,000. We don't really know, but it's not your opinion. It's the environment that you've put the body in, and it's determining what matters. If you strength train, and when I say strength train, I mean you have to be lifting an appropriate level of intensity. So 80, 85% rep max, theoretically, around there is going to stimulate or make the body recognize the importance of the lean contractile tissue, and therefore it'll make it not want to cut that loose for energy. So it will eventually if it has to, but it'll be way, way down the list of priority. So if you're trying to lose body fat, strength training really prioritizes the need to keep the lean muscle you have, or possibly even accrue more. But the fat loss can happen regardless. But if you're trying to lose body fat without strength training, you're likely risking muscular atrophy. And if your diet is aggressive, the likeliness is much more relevant.
I'll try to kind of wrap it up because I know you're short on time, and but essentially what would be good for people to understand is that body fat is not the all cause of evil, so to speak.
No.
Especially for females, it's extremely important to maintain overall health, overall hormonal balance. We didn't go into mood and all those kind of things because I think that's another topic we could make just on that, how body composition can affect you mentally. The best approach is probably making sure that you incorporate resistance training to begin with, and then take it slower and kind of marry to ideas that the longer it takes, the probably easier it is for your body to adapt and maintain that looks you are achieving at the end. And there's a huge difference between men, women, athletic, and normal people.
Absolutely.
So if you're someone who's just training recreationally and looking up on bikini chicks who are training for a living, you're probably draining yourself mentally, because it might be almost unrealistic thing to achieve unless you resort to heavy, not even heavy, but like drug use and things that not necessarily reflect onto your health in a long run.
Right. Yeah. They might be needing things that they're not even aware of because it's a taboo thing. So they're not going to be publicly saying, I use this, this, and this, but they do. So it's important for females to understand that. And then the body fat percentage, we didn't even touch on this, but the effects on the menstrual cycle and hormone regulation via that and, causing irregularities is vital.
Awesome, Scott. Appreciate your time. I'm going to let you off. I'm holding you back already. But I'll see you in our next video.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.